Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Violetta. And yeah, wonderful to be part of this conversation. So inspiring in so many different dimensions that we've been hearing. And yeah, what I'll do is I'll share some slides and probably take about 10, 15 minutes max, and then it'll open the space for a conversation. What you'll see in these slides is basically it's like a vision of an ecological civilization. Interestingly, one that developed through work I've done with a lot of people. I'm based in California, but from around the world. And then we sort of we got to connect with the eco-civilization vision of Violetta. So it's such a rich thing to discover these kind of strands of thoughts going around and then connecting together and creating something more emergent. So you will see echoes of a lot of the themes that Violetta's brought up, that 𝗣cie and then Indra and Pat have been talking about. So I think it'll be interesting to see how these come together. So I'm going to share the screen right now. And hopefully you'll see it's called Envisioning an Ecological Civilization. And well, basically, to begin with, I would like you to imagine essentially a computer program that's just run amok, that things are not working, is going completely out of control. And all around, computer programmers are trying to find these bugs to fix it. Every time they fix it with a bug, it only gets worse and worse. And then finally, somebody comes up and yells, "We've got to change the operating system." That's what I'm going to be taking you through, that idea of what might be to change the operating system of our entire global Earth system. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this kind of image, how we're rapidly heading for a precipice. This is the planetary boundaries framework that Johan Rockström and his team have put together. And yeah, just again, probably people are aware of this, but all around the world, scientists are like trying to say, we're going to end our civilization. We're on collective suicide if we don't do something to change this. So what this presentation is really about is exploring what that might mean to actually change the global operating system, basically from capitalism to one that is more like an affirmation of life. And we can understand, first let's kind of think about what this operating system is about. Ultimately, it comes from our dominant values of our world, which are really based on separation. I think this picture is iconic of what I mean by that. Everyone's so connected with their technology, separate from each other, separate from the food they're about to eat. And if you look at what that modern story of separation really is about, it looks like something like this, that nature is a machine. Humans are separate from nature. Humans are essentially selfish and competitive, that human progress arises from the conquest of nature, right? That the earth is a resource to exploit for human benefit. And the purpose of life is to, well, basically just get wealthy and powerful. Now, we're so imbued in this that it seems like, well, that's the way the world is, or that's how people are. But it's actually a very unique worldview that just emerged, really for the first time in history in early modern Europe, with people like Francis Bacon, the prophet of the scientific age, who got people inspired with the idea that we can extend the power of dominion of the human race itself over the universe, or render ourselves masters and possessors of nature. And the Europeans at that time thought of humanity basically as white Western European Christian males. So they viewed they had a right to not just conquer nature, but conquer other continents too. And it was through that hold on a sec, this worldview of separation that came out from modern Europe led to see nature as a resource, others as resources, led to these ideas of human supremacy over the rest of nature, white supremacy over other races, leading to extraction and exploitation as underlying values of our system of global capitalism that we have today. And we're truly dominated by global capitalism, although to the point that 69 of the world's 100 largest economies are not nation states, but transnational corporations, just like Violetta was mentioning earlier. And the thing about global capitalism is it's based on a requirement of perpetual growth. The values of companies are not based on what they're offering now, but what investors expect they'll be offering 20 years into the future. It's a system designed to mint billionaires, and one that's led to the greatest inequality in history, with roughly 24 billionaires owning as much wealth as half the world's population of 4 billion people. And the core design principles of this operating system, basically to maximize shareholder returns, keep growing at all costs, material consumption being a proxy of welfare, and non-human nature as a resource to exploit. And it leads to this extractive directive of monetizing everything as fast as possible, turning humans into conditioned consumers, exploiting every available resource on Earth. And as a result of that, we're basically looking at one of the greatest transitions in human history. We're either going to be headed for collapse as a result of this overconsumption, or to something like a sort of a fortress Earth or a technosplit, where the wealthy elites basically cut themselves off from the rest of the world that endures collapse. From a moral standpoint, maybe even more morally egregious than collapse itself. But this is the question, can we find that path of sustainable flourishing that's different from those two? And that's what more and more people around the world are calling an eco-civilization or an ecological civilization. And to get to that point, what is required is a transformation in the basis of our global civilization from one that is wealth-based to one that is life-based. Essentially, a global cultural and economic system that would promote sustainable flourishing for humans and the Earth. Essentially, the overriding objective of the entire civilization would be to create the conditions for all people to flourish as part of a thriving, living Earth. And it's not just the work that Violetta and Indra and Pat and Ove and I are doing, but this is what's so exciting about this vision. It's shared by so many different groups all over the world. In South America with Buen Vivir and Sumac Korsai, and in Africa with Ubuntu. Indra's mentioned things like transition towns, people pursuing degrowth movements, spiritually, engaged Buddhism, deep ecology, traditional Chinese principles, different political movements. This is what's exciting, is that all these millions, ultimately, of movements are pointing towards this shared direction of a life-affirming civilization. And this can be based on the principles of ecology itself, essentially like how living systems self-organize. Because ecosystems, in fact, can remain resilient for millions of years if they're not being basically destroyed by human civilization. And one of the bases of these is the realization that far from what our current operating system tells us, nature is not actually selfish. And evolutionary biologists now know, if you look back over billions of years, the great steps in the complexity of life on Earth that led to this abundant world we live in today all came about not through extra competition, but through increases in cooperation between different organisms. Life evolved through cooperation. In the words of systems biologist Lynn Margulis, life didn't take over the world by combat, but by networking. And in fact, when hominids appeared, it actually was arising not from us learning how to outcompete those around us, but from us learning how to cooperate even more powerfully than before. When our human ancestors, hominids, first found themselves in the Great Rift Valley in a different environment, they were vulnerable to predators. Those who learned to collaborate were the most successful. And over time, our identity expanded from self and kin to include the entire group. So the human ability to cooperate with each other, even those who are not kin, is actually what differentiates us from other primates. So we evolved what are called moral emotions, things like compassion, gratitude, guilt, shame, or embarrassment. We don't just act morally because we think we should, but because it actually feels right to us as human beings. And indigenous cultures have long known that. That's that concept of Ubuntu that Violetta mentioned before in the chat. I am because you are. Or in North America, the Lakota have a concept called 𝗘𝗰cie𝗰𝗶𝘃𝗶𝗃𝗃. We are all related. Not just talking about each other, humans, but all of life around them being related. So if we look just really briefly at what some of the principles would be of that sort of ecosystem resilience, of that what an ecological civilization would look at if it was applied to human civilization. Basically, it looks something like this, that fundamentally, this notion of symbiosis, that each party gains from a reciprocal relationship. Pretty much just a scientific word of saying exactly that fifth alternative that 𝗣cie was mentioning earlier. And that would be really the foundation of an ecological civilization, leading to fairness, justice, equity, and individual dignity. Recognizing that nature is a holarchy, and each is part of a greater whole. And so the health of the whole system requires the flourishing of each part. That's known as fractal flourishing. We'd see it in terms of diversity, that a system's health depends on differentiation and integration, with the inherent right of each person and community to participate in cultural, political, and economic power. We'd see balance, with every part in a harmonious relationship with the entire system, to lead to like a steady state economy with equitable distribution of wealth and power. Subsidiarity is key. Like the grass, literally grassroots self-autonomy. The grass doesn't look to some other part of the ecosystem to tell them what to do. They grow right there in the grassroots. So in an ecological civilization, that means pushing decision-making to the lowest level possible in the system. And then there's embeddedness, recognizing humanity as being part of the natural world, as 𝗣cie and others have mentioned already today, tending Mother Earth rather than trying to control her. And finally, there's the concept of regeneration, sustainable flourishing into the long-term future. Here in North America, the Iroquois Confederacy had in their constitution that in our every deliberation, we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. So basically, to summarize, what we're looking at is a transformation in values, emphasizing the quality of life rather than material possessions, basing our choices, political, social, and economic, on our shared humanity, with justice and dignity for all, and building civilization's future on the basis of symbiosis with the living earth, where the flourishing of the natural world is a foundational principle. And we won't, of course, go into it in detail right now, but every one of those principles applies all across civilization. This is a key element of this vision. That doesn't just apply, we're not just talking about ecological economics or things like that, but every aspect of what we consider civilization can and needs to be transformed to be life-affirming. And again, I won't read even these out in detail, but these words you'll see there, things like universal basic income, distributed ledger and technology, rights of nature, disassembling patriarchy, citizens' assemblies. These are the kinds of specifics we're talking about, all arising from that foundational life-affirming basis. So if you do want to join this conversation online, Violetta was mentioning, I put the link in the chat already, invite you to join the Deep Transformation Network. It's thousands of people from around the world who have joined. We have monthly live meetings, all kinds of stuff, asynchronous feeds going on. It's basically a global community exploring pathways toward an ecological civilization. So that's my prepared slides. Let me stop my screen share right now. And back to you, Violetta, if you want to take it from here.